You've reached my review for the 2019 film The Curse of La Llorona, and yes, I'm well aware that I'm probably saying that word wrong. When I re-watched this film the other night, the characters were saying it in a kind of Spanishy type of way that I just can't remember. So for me, it's La Llorona, right or wrong. Now, this was a strange one when it came out because it wasn't declared as a Conjuring universe film until the month of release. And if you watch the movie, it's this kind of ghost tale that only really has the most tenuous link to the other films in the series. That link being the character of Father Perez, who has a small role here and also a small role in the original Annabelle film. And call me cynical, but I can just imagine that it was the case. Some suit at New Line Cinema stood up in a boardroom meeting one day and said, "Hey, you know that ghost film we've been sat on? Well, I've thought of a way we could triple the take." And just in case you can't remember who Perez is when you finally go and see this, they've put a line in there about how he once experienced this really disturbing situation in his life. And if you still don't know what he's talking about, they actually put images of Annabelle up on the screen. So you're left in no doubt that this is a Conjuring universe film, and we'll take your money now, please. Now, you probably think I'm hating on this film. I actually quite like it after all that. It's directed by a guy called Michael Chavez or Chavez. I've probably got that wrong as well. And if you want a yardstick as to how likely you are to enjoy The Conjuring 3 when it finally comes out next year, then you should pay attention to this movie, because Chavez is also going to be directing The Conjuring 3. So what's this ghostly tale about? Well, it starts off in the 17th century. This woman, happily married, has 2 sons, but one day she discovers that her husband is cheating on her with a much younger woman. So in a fit of rage, she kills her 2 sons, and then, feeling really guilty about that, she kills herself. But her spirit cannot rest afterwards, so presumably for the next 300 or 400 years, or however long it is, she does what anybody would do when they feel guilty after killing some kids, which is to say she goes out and kills more kids. Anyway, we then move forwards to Los Angeles in 1973, where we spend the rest of the movie. And it's here we meet Anna, a single mother who is trying to raise her kids whilst simultaneously juggling her job as a social worker. Her latest case involves the removal of these 2 boys from the care of this mother who, it turns out, has been locking them in a cupboard in the living room for prolonged periods of time. Not something that social services will ever take kindly to if you were thinking of doing it yourself. But unbeknownst to Anna, this woman wasn't performing this act to be cruel. She was doing it to protect them from La Llorona. It turns out the ghost had targeted these 2 boys and the mother had figured it out. Now, unfortunately, once the 2 boys are moved across town into this halfway house, it then becomes much easier for La Llorona to take them out, which she does. And to cut a long story short, through a chance encounter, La Llorona then makes Anna's kids her next target. So I have to wonder at this point, how many kids has she taken out in the 300 years between 1973 and the prologue back in the 17th century? Because after killing these 2 kids at the start of this film, she moves straight on to Anna's kids. There's no break in between. So I can only presume that she just keeps bouncing from one pair of kids to another. So why have the authorities never picked up on all these kids going missing between Mexico and Los Angeles? The mind really boggles. But the important thing is that the scare factor is extremely high in this film. I mean, the moment I knew that this Chavez guy had got me was this scene in the halfway house where these 2 boys walk through these mazy corridors, because the atmosphere is just absolutely electric. There's this other great scene as well where Anna's kids this time get trapped in this car, and they're sort of keeping their heads down and wondering where La Llorona is going to appear at these windows, and there's all these pauses, and I'm kind of sat there like that. I mean, like I say in any of these kind of supernatural film reviews, the mileage you get out of this stuff just depends on how susceptible you are to this type of horror. But it just so happens, me personally, I am very susceptible to it, but opinions will, or experiences will differ, I should say. In terms of the acting, there are a couple of names. Anna is played by Linda Cardellini, who I mainly remember from those Matthew Lillard-fronted Scooby-Doo films. There was a time when my son used to make me sit through those movies over and over again, and Cardellini was right in the thick of all the silliness as Velma, I think she played. So it's nice to see her doing a serious role. Oh, I did see her in 5 minutes of The Avengers as well, if that counts. Raymond Cruz is in this movie as the convenient expert who turns up about half an hour from the end. This is another throwback to Annabelle another movie with lots of on-hand help that materialised out of nowhere when the characters needed it. Raymond Cruz used to be in lots of action films from the 1990s, things like Alien Resurrection and Clear and Present Danger, I think Executive Decision. He always seemed to be sort of the 8th or 9th person on the cast list, and you'd probably forget he was even in a particular movie the day after you watched it. But there was a time when he just seemed to be in everything, and then I didn't see him for like 20 years, at least in my viewing world. And so to see him again in this as a middle-aged man as he is now, obviously, is cool to see. Now, there's only really one big negative on this film, and I'd say that's the final 20-25 minutes. For the first hour, I think this is as good as any Conjuring movie, really. It's really decent, but it just sort of fades a little bit. I don't know if that's because I'm getting desensitized to the Wailing Woman by the time we get to the finale, but it just feels a bit like the ending to an episode of Supernatural or something, with the salt that they put on the doorway and the way they take out the ghost in the attic. Plus the location as well is a little bit underwhelming. It's this boring suburban house for the last 20 minutes, and it's compared to the monastery from The Nun or that incredible farmhouse place from Annabelle Creation, it's a bit of a come down, I'd say, although the garden is pretty amazing. There's a scene earlier in the movie where Anna's daughter has to go outside for some reason, and we get a couple of scares out there, but the design of like the swimming pool and the back garden as a whole, it just reminds me of those old Silent Hill games. It just needs a bit of mist and a dog's head on the floor somewhere. So will there be a sequel to this? There could be, but I mean, the box office was pretty good. I think they made something like 130 million off a 10 million budget, which makes it easily the least performing movie in the Conjuring series. But compared to the rest of the horror market, that would be an excellent take. So I've no idea, honestly. We'll have to see. I think if they did do another one, they would probably set it, the La Llorona character against a different batch of people, not just Anna and her children again. I don't think they'll take the route that The Ring 2 took, if you see what I mean. On the whole, though, I enjoyed this film. I think it's definitely underrated. I think it scored something like 26% on Rotten Tomatoes, but I think that's worse than what it should have got. I think a lot of people probably just skipped by this one because Annabelle Comes Home was coming out at roughly the same time, and plus a lot of people didn't even know this was a Conjuring Universe film because they kept it all kind of cloak and dagger. So right, shall we get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I've given for this film? We have 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5, so quite an average score, although I did have it kind of 3.5 for a while. So if I could give a film 3.25, I probably would have done that, but I don't split up the ratings that much. So it is 3 bloody axes. That puts it behind the majority of the Conjuring Universe films, but still comfortably ahead of Annabelle at the bottom. Right, there's no pin for the horror locations map today. We've already done LA. I will be back soon to complete this series with Annabelle Comes Home. So until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.